with that comes a lot of volatility. And with volatility, I believe it will be harder to do business. But the companies which are really good at this and are also willing to embrace new technologies and ways of going to market and ways of reaching their customers and building trust are going to ultimately succeed.
Welcome to the Industrial Growth Institute podcast. I'm Ed Marsh, your host, and I hope some sort of an idea provocateur, taking you right out to the edge of your comfort zone. I talk frequently about how industrial companies can learn important lessons about marketing and sales from SaaS and technology businesses. And today's episode is going to be, I think, a great example as we dive into the topic of partnerships. That's really one of the strongest trends and biggest buzzwords in tech revenue growth today. So I'm pumped to chat with Franz Schrepf, who's a director of strategic partnerships at StreamYard and a company called Hopin, a live video and virtual events company, which actually was called Europe's fastest growing startup of all time by Sifted. He started there as employee number 16, and he's been with it now through $1 billion in fundraising and up to 1,200 employees and 7 acquisitions. And he's actually personally led the structuring of several large alliances, including with LinkedIn, YouTube, Facebook, RingCentral, and Adobe. So I mean, this is a guy who knows what he's talking about. He's a frequent contributor and speaker on the topic of partnerships on podcasts and blogs and events and conferences. And, here's what I would say is the defining thing about Franz. He has literally written the book on partnerships. In his upcoming book that's going to be published shortly in August, it's called The Book on Partnerships. He explains software startup partnerships in a way that makes them accessible to anybody, regardless of your background or your experience in startup land. And I'm hoping from this conversation will be clear, even regardless of your industry, because many of these principles are ubiquitous. Franz is the host of one of the most popular partnership podcasts, The Partnership, the partnership ship being like in a boat. And it's recorded live on LinkedIn every 2 weeks. So it's, I got to say, a bit intimidating for me to be facing him over the microphone since he's a pro, but be sure to listen carefully. Like this episode, comment, leave a review, and please share this episode with anyone who you think is going to want to hear it. So Franz, welcome, and maybe I should say Grüß Gott.
Dankeschön. Thanks for the kind introduction, Ed. It's great to sit on the other side of the interview mic this time and chat more about partnerships.
Cool. Less prep work on that side of the mic.
Yeah, definitely.
So let's start with a major milestone. You're a new dad. Congratulations.
Yeah, thank you. So she was born in end of January. Our first daughter. We're very excited about it, and I'm very enjoying dad life right now. It feels really, really special. It's like almost as if somebody switched on the color on your television, and you're like, this thing had additional features I didn't know.
Does it have a sleep mode?
No, not yet. definitely watching it all night.
Yeah,
well, but in color.
It's one of life's most amazing experiences, and each age has incredible frustrations and incredible joys, and I watch my kids going through it now with their kids, and it's so rewarding. So congratulations to both you and your wife.
Yeah, and congratulations on being a granddad.
Thank you.
I always tell my wife the real end game is to be a grandparent, because it's like having a child but without all the hassle.
Yep.
So that's what we're working towards right now. We're just in the in-between step.
Yeah, and actually my wife is Oma and I'm Opie. So
yeah, nice.
All right, so a little bit of German there mixed in, and here's the context. So I got to ask you, how does a Bavarian banker end up in Northern California tech? What's that story?
Oh, that's a great question, and we're going all the way back. But so when I was a kid, I actually grew up in Monterey Bay, California, so it's not unfamiliar territory for me. But then my family moved back to Munich, Germany, where I'm from and where I grew up. And in Germany, actually, 60% of people, when they graduate high school, don't go to university, but do an apprenticeship. And it's one of the reasons why we have a relatively young youth unemployment rate in Germany. And it's actually one of the things I only appreciated once I left the country, how developed that apprenticeship system is. And so I did an apprenticeship in Germany in a bank for 2 years, where I did 2 months of work in the bank and then 1 month at vocational school where we learn how to be bankers.
Mm-hmm.
And during that time, I just realized that it was absolutely not for me. All my dreams of working in a bank were crushed, and I just wanted to go out and build things. It was very clear to me that I wanted to I wanted to achieve something bigger and build something. I didn't know what that was. but it wasn't where I was right now. It wasn't in Munich. It wasn't in Germany, frankly. And so I went to Amsterdam to study in university. So I studied in Amsterdam and Rotterdam. And then afterwards, I told all my friends I wanted to start a startup. And I had no money. I had no idea. I had no co-founders. I didn't have anything you would need to start a startup. So the odds were
Except
stacked
you had the
against me.
drive and you had the passion.
Yes, I had the drive and the passion, and um, through like a connection, like talking about partnerships, like it's always about connections and always about your network. But through a connection, I found out about like this one talent investor in London. It was a very new thing, and this talent investor basically had like a gray page, like a gray website, and it just said, "Come to London. We'll give you money. We'll introduce you to co-founders, and we'll help you find an idea." And I was like, "This is it. This is exactly what I was looking for." And so I flew to London, had this one interview that was the only interview I've ever really done for any kind of job.
Wow.
And I got in to this talent investor, and then 9 months later, founded a company, raised money for it. It was in the video space as well, so very relevant to what we're doing with StreamYard right now. And we worked on that for 2 years, but then it became clear it wasn't working out right around the time COVID happened. So that was like March 2020, was when it was clear that COVID would, our business would fail, but then also COVID meant like nobody else was hiring. And so I was kind of like in a tough spot where I was like not sure what my next step should be. And so our investor, again, Networks, told me about his portfolio company, Hopin, and just said, look, like nobody else is hiring right now. There's nothing else you can do. Can you just go over and like help out these guys? Because they have like way too much inbound right now. And at the time I was, mostly just joined because like our investor, like I felt bad that I lost investors' money. So I was like, fine, if you're asking me to help you out, I'll definitely help you out. And so I joined as like number 16 at Hopin, and within like a week I realized just like what kind of special moment we were in right now, because Hopin was a virtual events platform which was founded by our founder Johnny, who actually has the most incredible founding story. He caught like a bug while traveling in Thailand and had an
You mean like
autoimmune
an illness
disease.
bug?
Sorry.
An illness
Yes, an
bug.
illness bug. Yeah.
Okay.
And so that's a British expression, I guess. Like in America, we wouldn't say bug, but he caught a bug while traveling in Thailand and had an autoimmune disease. And because of that, he had to shelter in place and like isolate himself from the world for like several years. And
Wow.
so he was trying to figure out, how can I network, how can I continue advancing my career, etc. How can I attend events? And so he just came up with the idea for a virtual events platform. Before, it was like nobody really considered that actually an option.
Hmm.
And he basically, because he was isolating, designed it for people who were isolating. And then fast forward a couple months, COVID happened, and all of a sudden the entire world was social distancing and had to isolate at home. And all of a sudden there was an insane product market fit where the entire world was our market.
Wow.
And so we really like caught on in that moment, and went from like 16 people when I joined to over 1,200 people during the peak of the pandemic. Over $8 billion of valuation, $1 billion raised,
Wow.
hundreds of thousands of customers, hundreds of partnerships, which I'm very excited to talk about, and also 7 acquisitions as well, as you
Wow.
mentioned. And then I moved to California as a result of that as well.
Got it. Along the way, I think you had time in Malaysia and Peru too, right?
Yes, so that was during college. During Hopin, we actually like spent 2 years in the Bahamas. That was like our little like COVID hideout, because it wasn't really
Wow.
relevant where we were. So we were in the Bahamas already for like the time zone, because we had a lot of US based partners. And then it ultimately became clear that like a lot of our biggest partners were in San Francisco. So it made sense for me to actually come here,
Got it.
because it's kind of the mecca of partnerships. Like right now, I'm also hosting monthly meetups for partnerships professionals in the Bay Area, and we always get between like 30 to 70 people, or sometimes even over 100 people, who attend these events, just because there's such a high density of partnerships people in this place.
So one of the themes I think that I've picked up a number of times in a number of these conversations is, as great as remote and video and everything else is, face to face remains powerful. And you're saying that even in the tech space, and we know it certainly is true in the industrial space.
Yeah, I think so. I think during COVID, we definitely assumed that in person was gonna, become like less important in the future,
Hmm.
and everything would be at minimum like hybrid. So everything would have like a virtual component to it, and it wouldn't matter if you're in person or physically present, etc. But I think as soon as people started going to their first events again after COVID, they realized like there is a special magic to being in person, and you just can't deny it, right? And
Right.
so at minimum, I would say you should try to meet like the people who are important to you. Like that could be your teammates, that could be your most important partners, etc. At least once. Like there's something special which happens when you meet at least once and then
Hmm.
afterwards do your video calls again. Like I don't think you have to be in person every day. That seems pretty unproductive and inefficient. But there is definitely like something special around meeting people in person and like, at least sharing that bond, sharing
Right.
longer conversations with them.
Right. Yeah, I completely agree. Now, in 2015, you did your TEDx talk at Amsterdam University, and you titled it "There is no luck, only good marketing." And
Yeah.
I think you made two key points. Number one, that you have to understand what you call the secret needs, but basically the outcomes, not what your product is or what your service is, but how it changes the life or business for the person that you're selling it to. You said that's the key to marketing. And secondly, that the best place to meet your prospects isn't necessarily where you assume that it's going to be. And both of those seem to kind of echo through this whole partnerships thing. I assume that all of that applies to companies. You used the example of dating, but I assume there's a business analogy there too, right?
Yeah. I appreciate the thorough research you've done for this interview. But definitely, like, I guess, like, 2015 when I did the talk, like, dating was probably more on top of my mind in companies.
Right.
But it definitely applies to companies as well. Like, just as a piece of background as well, like, I studied marketing and I worked in marketing before I switched over to partnerships. So, marketing is something which is very relevant to the topic of partnerships in general, but also just something which I think every company can benefit from. When you think about like the secret needs you mentioned, right? Um, we saw this at Hopin pretty clear. Like when we invented like the term virtual event and actually the concept of hosting these virtual events, if you would have asked customers before, like what do they want? They would have wanted like, if you look at the value chain of attending an event, you have to like drive to the airport, you have to go into the plane, you have to like drive from the airport back to the hotel, then check into the hotel, then go check in for the event and so forth. And so if you would have asked customers like how can we innovate in events, they would have pointed us towards each individual step and would have been like, oh, I want to make the event check-in process slightly
Right.
easier, or I want to have compostable badges because it's better for the environment, or something like that. But when you attend a virtual event, the process is just you sit down, you log into your laptop, and then you're in the event. There isn't really like that much. All of a sudden, all these steps are gone. Like there's no airplane involved. There's no car. There's no hotel. There's no check-in badges. Like all these things were all of a sudden gone. And so what people really wanted was a way to attend these events. They didn't want like COVID-friendly like check-in measures and like wristbands with like yellow and green or whatever. They actually just wanted a way to like gather, given the circumstances.
Hmm. Yeah, makes sense. For me, language is fascinating. So I'm curious. When you sat down to write your TEDx talk, did you write it in German and translate it, or did you just write it in English?
It was all in English. I think
Okay.
by now, like I've spent so much time abroad that like I probably think in English as well and then in German. But once you speak a couple languages, it's all a little bit jumbled up.
How many do you speak?
Four, just
Wow.
as a relic of like moving to different places.
Wow. That's impressive. So now you've got this kind of parallel path. On the one hand, you're an active practitioner in partnerships. You're running the partnership program at StreamYard. On the other
Yeah.
hand, you're also this kind of renowned expert on partnerships with an enormous personal brand in that space. How do you juggle those two personas?
Um, I don't see them as two personas. I think
Okay.
content creation is actually the easiest way to continue learning. Like one of the biggest mistakes I've made to date is that after high school I said I'm done learning. I want to earn money, and so that's why I started working in a bank. And it took me 2 years to realize like actually you should continue learning. Like if you stop learning, you're probably also stop growing, and when you stop growing, you're dying.
Hmm.
That's basically the definition of not growing. And so similarly, like when I entered partnerships, there was no book on partnerships yet. Like now that we're writing the book on partnerships, that will be changed.
Right.
But at the time, like there were very few books. The books were often written for like software companies in the early 2000s, so it was very like the world was very different back then. Um, and there was maybe like one blog on partnerships out there, but there weren't like a lot of resources. And so the
Hmm.
first thing I did when I started in my role in partnerships was actually just reach out to random people who had partnerships in their title, who worked at companies that I kind of was familiar with, and literally just asked them if they could sit down with me for like 30 minutes and we discuss, partnerships, just so I can understand like what actually, like what are the obvious mistakes you can make in this role. Like I
Hmm.
knew I would make some mistakes, but there are probably some obvious ones I can learn from others, so I can avoid them, and also I can learn what good looks like.
Right.
And so it started just as a couple of conversations, and then what I would do is I would take notes and then summarize these notes and just post them on LinkedIn because I felt like there was nobody else talking about this. So it would be cool to just like summarize these notes, put them on LinkedIn, and then just share what I learned. Like I'm learning out loud in the market. And then what happened is that other people would start chiming in and then just say like, "Oh, actually, I don't agree with this point. I think you're wrong." Which was like great because it just expanded the learning opportunity further. And so over time, I just realized like, hey, these conversations are really helpful that like I'm having on LinkedIn. I should like spend more time on this, and then just implement what I like learn in my job, because that's one of the biggest mistakes I think people make is like there are people who might want to switch into partnerships roles, and so they read up all about it but they actually never implement it, and so then they get slapped in the face when they market actually, like when they meet the market.
Right.
And so it's really important to not just like learn but actually practice what you preach, so you can actually understand whether what you're saying makes sense and whether what you're saying actually holds up in the market.
So your personal brand then is a byproduct of the work that you're doing to become an expert in partnerships.
Yes, it's completely selfish. Like it sounds like I'm like, generously handing out like information for free, which is true in a way. But what I'm really benefiting from are actually the conversations around that content. Like I'm just basically putting out the ideas that I have, and then like I'm really excited when somebody challenges me on them, because that's really where growth happens.
So the interesting thing about that model is I hear it applicable for industrial executives. I spent some time talking about executive presence and personal branding and why I believe CEOs and presidents and CROs of industrial manufacturing companies ought to have a strong LinkedIn presence.
Mhm.
But often there's a hesitance like, well, I'm not this expert or I'm not an authority. And why do people want to hear from me? And you're breaking it down into a really kind of natural way. Have conversations with people that you're interacting with and just learn from them and share the learnings.
Yeah, and also keep the conversation going. Like what's really important in partnerships is that you're top of mind,
Hmm.
because ultimately like you need to be at the right time at the right place. And it goes back to what I discussed during that TEDx talk as well. Like good marketing basically means being at the right time at the right place.
Right.
And how can you ensure that you're at the right time at the right place? You can't guess when the right time is happening and you can't guess where the right place is. So
Right.
the only thing you can do is stay top of mind and stay relevant to people for a specific use case. And so in my case, like I basically like, started owning the term partnerships. And so whenever somebody thinks about like the partnership specific topic, they'll just remember like, oh, this person Franz talks about that a lot. And so by owning that term, I own the right place. The place is partnerships. And then the right time, like I can't guess when the right time will be. So I'll just keep on posting like multiple times, a week, have these
Hmm.
conversations, tag people in the post, just resurface our conversation once in a
Right.
while through
Right.
these posts as well, so I can actually guess the right time as well. And so that's how I match time and place.
Now, you've talked about the interviews and the written content and using LinkedIn as the platform for most of that written content, but obviously you've
Yeah.
had a very strong multimedia kind of bias from the beginning. I mean, you ran your minimum viable talk show when you were still in college, so you've had this audio, you've had this video inclination, and you've got this very strong entrepreneurial background. So executives listening to you might say, "Well, yeah, I mean, all that sounds cool, but you're wired differently than me. You're an entrepreneur. You're natural in front of the camera." What's your response to people who kind of are hesitant?
I think there's some truth in that. I think it will come more naturally to some people than to others. Like for example, I work for a live streaming company, so it was very clear for me that like I need to start my own live stream, because otherwise, like I can't dog food my product, right? I need to use my product to actually like understand, what our customers feel like.
Right.
And so that was just natural to me. But like a lot of people who work at our company don't host their own live streams, and the reason is just that it doesn't feel as natural to them, right?
Right.
But that shouldn't hold you back from pushing out content. Like there are different forms of content which can fit different types of people, right? There might be some people who are good at writing, there might be some people who are good at illustrations and graphics, which also do very, very well, like imagery. There are some people who are great at recording content, and then some people just have a face for podcasting, right? Some people might just want to be audio only.
Right.
But as long as you have something which is worth sharing, I think it's worth putting out there. The only thing to consider is your credibility. That's something which I've learned, because initially, like, if you want to create content, you might create content about like random topics because you're such a multifaceted person and you have so many different things you could talk about. But the main question you should ask yourself is like, why should people care? Why should they listen to you, right? And so I, for example, have multiple like facets to my personality as well. And for example, I'm a big crypto enthusiast. I'm like a big enthusiast for several other technologies as well. I have a daughter, I like love productivity, love rock climbing and so forth. But none of that is visible on my LinkedIn. My LinkedIn is just about partnerships. Like I'm the most single layered person on LinkedIn that I can be. And the reason is just because I want to occupy that share of mine with my audience. I don't want to dilute that brand at any cost. Like all that other stuff, I just post about somewhere else, because that's where I have the most credibility in.
But you let your personality come through because probably because there's so much video and so much audio, not just written material. So you share
Yeah,
that even if you don't get into the granular details of your life outside of partnerships.
yeah. I think it's fair to like share a little bit of personality just because you want to be you know
Sure.
like multifaceted in a way, or you want to like have that emotional connection as well.
Right.
But it's not a requirement, and I think that's also the hesitation. Like I think a lot of people are actually okay to share business content on LinkedIn,
Hmm.
but they might not feel comfortable sharing pictures of their kids, for example. Like I don't
Right.
I don't share pictures of my kids
Right.
at all, because I don't think I'm the one who should make that decision whether their face is on social media. um and so you just need to figure out what you're comfortable with. But ultimately, like, the reality of today's world is that your buyer is online, and
Hmm.
they're researching. LinkedIn is a great place. Like, a lot of the buyers are going to be there, especially in B2B, because you can use it during work hours.
Right.
Like if you're on Instagram or like TikTok or whatever, that's something which you're doing in private time and you can't really use it during work hours. But people are browsing LinkedIn for hours
Right.
during work because, they might be bored, or they might be telling themselves that they're actually doing research on something. And so that's really like where a lot of your audience is going to hang out. And so meeting them there is probably the single greatest way you can sell right now,
I,
in
I
B2B.
I agree. I think that makes a lot of sense. Now, I mentioned your book earlier, the book on partnerships. I
Yeah.
think it's set to for publish in August, right?
Hmm. That's correct.
Specific date that people ought to mark their calendars, or just sometime in the month of August?
Not yet, just some time. We're still finalizing it.
Okay. All right. So, as a dad, a husband, I know you don't share these other aspects of it, but you are a dad, a husband, a busy tech exec. You're building deals with the world's biggest companies. How did you find time to write a book?
I think I don't think you find time. I think you make time.
Okay.
Like there's a great book. It's called 4,000 Weeks, and it's about time management for mortals. And the idea is basically that busyness and tasks will always creep into life, and so there's never going to be like a moment where you have a certain amount of time to complete a task. The only way to ever like have time is to just make that time.
Hmm.
And in the book, they mention a great reference, which is from the personal finance world, which is pay yourself first. And so if you get allocated like a certain salary every month and you have a savings goal, save that money first and then make the rest work out afterwards. And it's the same for time as well. Like, it was very important to me to write this book. And so over the last couple of months, I just like allocated 3 hours, 4 hours every day to actually like writing, researching, etc. Um, to make sure that I, actually like meet my goal of publishing this book.
What's your
Another
day?
thing, just
Sorry.
oh, sorry. Another thing I wanted to say as well is like the way I wrote it is also very unique because what I did is basically I just took like the last 3-4 years of LinkedIn posts, video interviews I've done, etc., and actually summarized them up,
Wow.
because I'm not just like sitting there like coming up with my own ideas. Because that's like from a credibility standpoint not great. Like, you
Hmm.
want ideas which are validated and that resonate with your audience. And so what I did is I just looked at all the comments underneath my LinkedIn post to understand like which ideas resonated, what feedback did I get from people, and so forth, and quoted these people as well. And so in the book, there are going to be hundreds of references from other partnerships professionals, because it's not just me like who is trying to like figure this partnerships thing out, but actually as a community, we're trying to learn together because it's still such a new field.
So I'm interested that the half-life of partnership ideas in an area that feels like it's evolving very quickly is actually that long, that you're able to go back, look at content from 4 years ago, pull that stuff in as references, and it's still applicable on a contemporary basis.
I think the reason is that partnerships isn't like a novel idea in itself.
Hmm.
Like, I think people have been partnering for a long time, and like a lot of the terms, for example, can actually come from the manufacturing world, like OEM partnerships, like original
Right.
equipment manufacturer, like the good Apple and Intel partnership. Um, that's something which has been existing for a very long time, right? The renaissance it's experiencing is new. I think that's something which people haven't grappled with yet, is like, how does that apply to the software world? How does that apply to new industries? And also, like, how are the changes in the market forcing us to accept partnerships more? The reason
Right.
why partnerships is experiencing this renaissance right now is, for example, like the onslaught of AI content which is coming now. Like, AI is going to make it so easy to spin up like thousands of websites. So all your SEO, all your search engine optimization is going to go down the drain because somebody else can spin up thousands of websites
Hmm.
on your keywords and just like crowd you out, right? Similarly, like, maybe search engines as a whole are going to go away. Maybe people are not going to Google for you anymore because they can just ask like an AI, and maybe we need to learn how to like, be optimized for the AI search bots in the future.
Right.
But the one thing which we always know, regardless of what's happening in the market, is that a trusted recommendation is always going to win.
Right.
Like a trusted recommendation from somebody is always going to win out against some fake Amazon reviews or against some Google search result and so forth. Because if your friend, for example, has a certain phone and they love their phone and they rave about it, like you want to buy that as well.
Right.
And so partnerships really are built around like leveraging the trust that a product has already built with one customer to acquire more customers in the
I think
future.
it's essentially what we call in the industrial world a referral.
Yeah, in a way it's a referral, but also like accessing audiences which you might not have had
Right.
access to before, right? So it's like also figuring out like like company A has a certain set of customers, company B has a certain set of customers. How can we cross sell
Right.
into
Right.
each other's audience to just kind of create more connections? And that's really where the idea of an ecosystem comes in, because if your customer has multiple touch points with multiple companies and they all work really well together, it's very hard to rip and replace any single one of them. At that point your customer is like more or less locked in and will retain for basically the rest of their business life.
Yeah, ecosystem's definitely a buzzword in this space right now, but I think a perfect term. We're going to come back to that a little bit. First, I
Yeah.
want to dig into the book a little bit more. What did you learn about yourself through the grind of writing the book?
Yeah. Um, so this is actually the second one I'm
Okay.
writing. So I like wrote one book beforehand. I self-published that one, and with that book, it was about the TED Talk. It was basically just again feedback. Like the TED Talk took off, it got over 500,000 views, so I felt like people wanted to learn more about it. So I summarized it in book form, and I learned more about that one than about this
Okay.
one, because that one like was completely like the process of writing it was very difficult. Like I've never written a book before, so I just kind of like winged it and realized there were a lot of flaws in my methodology. And so for this one, I like approached it much better. Like I said, I've been writing it basically over the last 3 years by just putting out a lot of content and like reviewing all the comments, reviewing all the feedback, and so I have much more confidence that like the ideas in the book are like stress tested by the market. And then I also think to continue the same vein of creating content and learning, by writing a book, it really forces you to structure your thinking,
Mm-hmm.
and it really forces you to actually structure like um, the ideas you have in your head that you kind of mention loosely in conversations into just one big piece. And so even now while writing it, like I oftentimes reference an old chapter and I go like, oh, that's a great idea. I already forgot about it.
Right.
Because it's just so hard to keep all the ideas in your head at the same
What do
time.
you use for personal knowledge management?
Notion.
Do you?
Notion is just like my go-to for all my notes.
Got it. I spend a lot of time working in Rome research. I've tried Notion. I find Rome works well. Have you ever experimented with Rome?
Not yet. No, I heard great things, but I also heard that the tool either makes you super successful or it breaks you. That's what I was told.
I don't know. I don't quite see how that's the case, but anyway, I mean,
Okay.
it's not intuitive. I'll tell you that for sure.
Yeah.
It takes some work to kind of get used to it, and it takes work and consistent best practice where I fall down in constantly extracting the value out of it. So I've got a lot of stuff captured in there, and I don't always go back and query it the right way to make sure that I'm pulling all those old insights out.
Yeah. That's true. I think at the moment it's almost more about documenting. Like
Right.
over the last 10 years, I accumulated like thousands and thousands of notes, and I'm confident that that actually will pay off just as AI gets
Right.
better.
Yeah.
Like it might actually get better to just create then like front spot, and it's just gonna like give me back all my notes in exactly the right moment and exactly the way I want.
Yeah. Good point. Being able to access all that unstructured data in the right way at the right time, almost like you talked about earlier with prospects. So,
Yeah, just document as much as you
so
can.
the first book was self-published. This one's commercially published.
I haven't decided yet. So there are a couple of things I'm exploring right now, but I might self-publish it
Okay.
again just because I like the idea of it being something which I give back to the partnerships community. Like I don't know if you ever dabbled on writing a book, but it's the economics are very
Right.
poor. And so the question then is like, do you really need a couple of $1,000s, or do you think it's more of a branding exercise, and then a single like a future engagement you get is going to pay for all the effort you put
Right.
in? Um, so that's something which I'm evaluating right
And it
now.
may be
But ideally, I just want it to be like the book which somebody who is in my shoes back 4 years ago, who's starting, picks it up and actually like understands what partnerships are and can just avoid a lot of the painful lessons I had to learn,
all right.
because there were
So
many.
let me pull on that thread for a second, because let's say we've got a senior industrial executive who's intrigued by this conversation. If they get the book, is it all going to be tech references, or are they going to be able to see in there the themes and principles and philosophy and how it can apply to their business, just like it applied to your business?
Yeah, it is definitely based on the experiences I had in software startups. And so the book is actually fully called like the book on partnerships, how startups work with partners to win more deals, add features, and get
Mm-hmm.
acquired. Because these are like the three things which people really cared about is like how can partners help me make more money? How can they help me add features? And how can they help me get
Right.
acquired? And so similarly, like I think these are these three elements transcend across all industries. I'm pretty sure an industrial executive will be equally interested in like making more money, adding functionality that they don't want to build themselves, and ultimately potentially having a business
Mm-hmm.
exit where they can actually then cash out and retire on the
Right.
Bahamas.
And after, I know this current iteration of publishing isn't done yet. You've got a couple more months ahead of you of hard work. What's your sense? Is there a third one in there somewhere after that, or will you call it quits after this?
Um, in terms of like the benefits of partnerships.
No, another book.
Oh, and never book. Oh,
Yeah.
100%. Like, yes, I do think like it's something which you don't do because you think that there's like economic value in it. I think you do it because of like a shared passion. It just feels
Right.
right. And so I can't like I do see the branding value of it. I don't see the economic value of writing a book. I feel like there are better ways of making
Sure.
money. But I do like the idea of just becoming like an expert or master in one field, writing the book, and then being able to reference it a couple years later.
Right.
Because you might actually become an expert in some other field in that time, and then you have a pie shaped skill set where you actually like know that you're an expert in one field. You can always like go back and access that knowledge you had back in the
Right.
day, but then actually like apply it to a completely new industry as well. And something as partnerships is completely transferable.
Sure. Absolutely.
Like I do think that is it works across all industries and it works across every single type of business, similar to like marketing as well.
This is going to be kind of a silly question because we've just been talking about writing books. So obviously you've got a lot of written content. But my sense is that you've definitely over-indexed on video and multimedia. And we talked a little bit earlier about some of your motivation that you work for a live streaming company now. But I think you started obviously before you worked for a live streaming company. How did you have the vision to recognize that a lot of content was moving in that direction?
That's a great question. I think for me, a video has always been a great medium of actually like connecting with
Okay.
people. Like if I find it fascinating that there are influencers out there who I follow for years, but I actually don't feel like I have a great connection with them because I've never seen them
Hmm.
speak. I never seen their face, I never seen their expressions and so forth. And so it always felt like video would be like the right medium for me to actually build these connections with people. And it works really well for the niche I'm in with partnerships because realistically there are only like maybe like 100,000 people or so globally who work in this role. You could argue maybe it's a little bit more, but like it's definitely like a relatively small ecosystem we're operating in, and so you're gonna reach like a good amount of people like relatively fast when you put out content about this topic. So then it really becomes about the depth of the relationship. It's not about going viral. Like the partnerships content is rare to go
Right.
viral right now, because it's still relatively niche. But the depth of the relationship, like making people feel like they actually know you, making people feel like they understand like what you're about and like the goals you have as a person is really valuable because again you're going to be like top of mind for them, and they're going to feel like, oh, actually like I already have a relationship with this person, even though they might know me in return. It's called a parasocial relationship, and it's the weirdest thing ever. It happens regularly when I host meetups in the Bay Area that people would actually walk up to me and say like, hey Franz, how you doing, how's your daughter, etc. And they pretend like they basically talk to me as if we know each other for
Right.
years, but I'm meeting them for the first
Wow.
time. And I've gotten used to that feeling now, but it's also still terrifying because then I wonder if I forgot their name and we met before. But it turns out that we actually haven't met before.
You talked about meetups. You're obviously you've got your fingers in a lot of different places in the partnership space. You're a chapter leader, I think it's called, for an organization,
Mhm.
partnership leaders. Talk a little bit about that group.
Yes. Yeah, partnership leaders is like probably the number one industry association for partnerships. They've been doing a great job. Like they started roughly around the time when I started in partnerships as well, like roughly like 4 years ago. And so it's been exciting to see that we were both learning and growing together. But by now the industry like association has more than 1,800
Wow.
members globally. who are all in partnerships. It's a paid for community. It's invite only, so not everybody can join, which I learned is really important because a lot of the free communities where everybody can join, they immediately dilute the value. And so here you really have like high quality
Hmm.
people. And we all meet once a year for this big conference, Catalyst. This year is going to be in Chicago, which is very exciting. It's like a 2 year conference where we just like share kind of like what we all learned about partnerships because we're all still figuring this out together. But then there was a lot of demand for people to just meet more regularly, and so especially in the Bay Area, we can support monthly meetups. We could probably support like bi-weekly given like the turnout we have for every single
Wow.
one. But we're doing this across all the globe, and in the US, partnerships is pretty developed. I think people get the value of like relationship building and just collaboration and like creating win-win situation like outcomes together. I think in Europe it's not as developed. Like most of the membership is in the US still, so I'm very excited about all the action that's happening in Europe and all the meetups that are happening there. And then yeah, in geographies like APAC and so forth, like there's definitely a lot more education which has to happen to build out awareness of
So you're going to
partnerships.
have to start doing those videos in 4 languages now.
Yes, at some point I'll have to translate, or I'll let AI
There you
translate.
go. We talked about your podcast, or I mentioned your podcast in your bio up front, partnership. Now, you deliver it differently than many podcasts, differently than this podcast. You do it live every other week on LinkedIn. And that leads us to StreamYard, which is the company you work for, the tool that makes that possible. Um, I'm
Yeah.
sure that factored into your decision to deliver it that way, but it's a different modality than many people use for a podcast. How did you settle on that?
Um. So the podcast is delivered every 2 weeks live, and the reason is basically that we work for a live company, so that was an easy
Right?
choice. But there are some benefits to it, which I only realized afterwards. And I think the first thing is that for live content, the quality bar is much lower, which means that people are much more willing to sit for a live conversation unedited versus a podcast
Mm-hmm.
unedited. And so that reduces the amount of work you as the interviewer have significantly because you don't have to worry about every single and being like cut out, etc. There's very little post production which has to happen to actually publish it as a podcast afterwards. So that's something which I personally enjoyed because as a dad and writing a book and like having a full time job, etc. You only have so many hours in a
Right.
day. But then something interesting happened as well. When you're pushing out content, it's not really important that your content is like super high quality. Like I mentioned this in the TED talk as well, in the There Is No Luck, Only Good Marketing. It's not the best burger which is sold the most. It's the best promoted burger which is sold the most. And so similarly, like I've seen people put out really, really high quality content with like great production, great animations, like almost overproduced, where you're like, this is a niche podcast, sir. Only 10 people are listening to it. You don't need to like, hire an editor and like spend hundreds of dollars to like make it like look so fancy. But nobody watches it. Only like 10 people tune in or so. And why? Because it's hidden somewhere in somebody's podcast feed, or they don't do any promotion and so forth. And so I spin it up the other way around, where I started with the promotion piece first. I was like, where's my audience? The audience is on LinkedIn. And so by going live on LinkedIn, you actually we're immediately in front of all the people, and LinkedIn has great features to like alert people that you're going live, to make sure that they actually are reminded to tune in live and so forth. And then again, when you're doing a live podcast, people will ask questions in the audience. And so one of the great features of StreamYard is that you can pull in the questions. And so you again build like much deeper relationships with your audience when you do these podcasts live than if somebody is just listening on their podcast feed while they're going for a run or something like that. Like I'm not trying to downplay podcasts. I think there's definitely a world for listening after the fact, and it's also something which we see. Like we get hundreds and hundreds of listens after the show went live, but really the most engaged people want to be there live. Like the 50 people or so who are like diehards, they want to be on the call and ask questions and like feel like they're part of the show rather than just listeners.
And because you're doing it through LinkedIn, that pushes the dots closer together to access their audiences. In fact, the way I came across you was through you having Jared Fuller on a podcast and talking to him. And so
Yeah.
because I'm in his audience, now I'm in your audience, and that's how we became acquainted.
Yes, that's like one type of partnership is the
Right.
co-marketing, like cross promotion. Again, like this, you can imagine as like two circles with a Venn diagram, and like some of it is overlapping. Like these are your shared customers, but then how can we increase that overlap? How can we generate more shared customers by like cross selling into each other's audience?
And then you've got kind of an island vibe to it. I guess on the West Coast you'd call it Hawaii, and the East Coast I call it Caribbean. Thinking of Munich, I'd call it Mallorcan or Ibethinken. But how did you end
Yeah,
up with that Caribbean vibe? You wear a Hawaiian shirt, you've got the palms in the background. How does that fit in?
yeah. Well, as I said, like in the beginning of the call, I was living in the Bahamas at the time, And
Got it.
so those 2 years left an imprint on me. And so I was living in the Bahamas. I felt like it was the easiest thing was just to have a show which is called The Partnership. It was the laziest name I could come up with. I just looked at the word and was like, this is what it is. We don't gonna like, beat around the bush, and then just like start putting out content. And so it just kind of like organically happened. It's something which a lot of people underrate as well. Is just how these kind of shows
Mhm.
develop. If you go back and like look at the first podcast Lex Friedman, for example, did. Now he's like a big podcaster with millions of views. But in the first one he did, it was very poor, or the audio quality was not great, the animations were not great, etc. Like the questions might be feel like not great, etc. Like he started out very small, and Tim Ferriss as well. Like a lot of the big podcasters started out very very small, and then you incrementally
Right.
add. And so the big mistake is that people try to make this like phenomenal show from the first moment on, and then over engineer it, over produce it. It's never quite right. It has to be
Right.
perfect, etc. It's much better to take the startup approach and iterate. So you just take whatever is the easiest name you can find, which in my case was lucky, like it's the name which stuck and people enjoy. And then you just take whatever it is the easiest theme you can find, which is just wherever you are, or like whatever feels natural. And then you just start putting it out and just listen to the feedback of the audience members. And over time I added like better animations, better audio. I created a jingle with AI. I used AI to create like cool like holding videos and stuff like that. And then over time it just kind of becomes better and better produced.
But
And now it looks like a better end result. But in reality, like it started out pretty small, and we just tried to make every episode 1% better.
I guess because you do it during the business day, there's still no umbrella drinks.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. It's also rough when you're on the West
Right.
Coast because normally the show is at 9 a.m. and like it would be a very very long day if I start umbrella
Right.
drinks during that time.
All right. So let's. I mean, this has been a lot of great information and context, but let's really dig into the meat of this now. Partnerships, and I
Yeah,
mean, you've touched on it. You've offered some insights, but as a guy who wrote the book, give us 2 minutes on why you
yeah,
think partnerships are critical and how companies should think about them.
yeah. So as I initially mentioned, like I think the entire way we sell right now and the entire way we market is being uprooted. I think trust is being eroded on every front. I think it's going to be harder and harder to find reliable information because AI is just going to churn out like endless amounts of blog posts and endless amounts of reviews and so forth. So you're going to find like everything on Amazon has like 4.7 stars, and it's going to have like, AI generated reviews which rage around the product. But then when you buy it, it's actually not
Right.
that great. And so we kind of like start to distrust what we learn online, which means that we look for more reliable, trusted channels. Um, and so one of the most reliable channels is going to be the people who already have your trust. And so that could be individuals, that could be customers of a company, or that could be products you've already bought, which are basically other companies that you could partner with to then borrow their
Mm-hmm.
trust. In partnership, we call this the social capital the company has built up. And so similarly to, investment capital, it's something which you have to like raise and earn from your customers, and you have to spend it very carefully. Like you have to spend very carefully who you endorse, because every time you endorse a product which does not deliver, it actually decreases your social capital and builds what we call relationship
Right.
debt. And so these are the two kind of like concepts which you have to keep in mind, is like who has social capital with the audience I'm trying to sell to, and how can I avoid incurring debt with the audience.
But can't you? I mean, it doesn't have to be a promotion. Can it just be an introduction? Hey, we work with some people that use this and they've had good luck with it. I can't tell you much about it, but I think you ought to talk to these people.
So there are actually different ways of partnerships. Like as I mentioned initially, there are free outcomes that you're kind of trying to aim for with partnerships as a startup. But one thing which I noticed, which is why I wanted to write this book, is that there's a lot of misconception around what a partnership
Okay.
is. Because when I started like as the head of partnerships at Hopin, it was hilarious. Like every single email I got had partnerships in it, and my team just forwarded it to me and was just like, figure this out. And so the McLaren Formula One team was like, hey, do you want to sponsor us for this partnership? And they claimed that to be a partnership. There was like a niche Brazilian payments provider, and they were like, hey, this is a partnership, which is also not a partnership. And then there were all kinds of different like inbound messages from customers who wanted discounts and so forth, and they all said, hey, we want to do a partnership. But none of these things are partnerships. So the first thing I want to like set the record straight on is, what is a partnership? And I read like dozens of books. I talked with hundreds of people about this, and the conclusion I came up with is that a partnership is a relationship between two companies or more companies to create a competitive advantage. And this goes back to Mark Brigman, who is one of the OGs in this space. with his company Partneronomics. He was the first one who coined the term like competitive advantage around partnerships. And the idea is really like if a partner does not help both companies, or if a partnership does not help both companies win, it is not a partnership. It's just a vendor relationship. So you can imagine this like this. If a Brazilian payments provider comes up to me and says, hey, we can help you sell better in Brazil, pay us $50,000. That's not a partnership because that company doesn't really care about my success. It's not a competitive advantage. If I work with them, it's just them selling to me. So what is a partnership, right? A partnership could be if there is, for example, a Brazilian streaming company which does video hosting for all your live streams after the fact in Portuguese, and it's very well known by all the influencers and so forth. And they come to StreamYard and say, "Hey, we have this audience of video, creators in Brazil. Do you want to partner with us to access this audience? And in exchange, our audience becomes stickier because they have like more videos they put into their software, and so as a result, both of us win more in the market together." That is, for example, a partnership. And so it's really important to look at it from the lens of like competitive advantage, because that's where you can quickly decide whether something is actually worth looking into or not.
So it sounds like that's then a core element of your IPP, your ideal partner profile. It's built around competitive advantage, not necessarily from a graphic
Yes.
attributes that we might normally talk about.
Yes, exactly. And it's really important to look at it not just from like, okay, where is the competitive advantage between me and the partner, but also where are customers
Mm-hmm.
benefiting from it? Like, who are the shared customers, right? A big part of your IPP has to be like the customer overlap. It's very unlikely that a partnership will work if you don't have any existing customers. It could, like, there is a small chance, but you're basically building in the hope that people will
Right,
come, and that's never going to work. It's like one of the biggest mistakes you can make as a startup is build and they will
right.
come. And so the greatest thing you can do in partnerships is look for people where you have like a kernel of partnerships, like a seed already inside of like that partnership opportunity. Like there's already like a couple of shared customers and they're really raving about it. And then the question is like, how can we find more of those? How can we find the first one is really difficult, but how can we find more like this is great, because that will allow you to like create an ideal customer profile as well around that partner and then go to market together.
Yeah, I tend to think in the industrial space of adjacent technology, and it may be the same in the tech space, but if you make a machine that's used for a certain step in a manufacturing process or production line, there's people that make machines that sit on either side. There's people that offer service to work on that. There's people that sell the consumables, whether it's glue or plastic or cardboard or whatever ends up being used as part of that process. All of those touch it, and I think of those as a potential first place to look for partners. Is that fair?
Yes, 100%. It should start with the customer. And so one way to think about it is like, I mean, you're in manufacturing, so you could think about it, I guess, like as a production
Mm-hmm.
line and just all the different individual steps each product has to go through. Similarly, in software, like you probably have something which resembles more like a river or a flow, where like you kind of have like a CRM where you have your customer relationship data in the beginning, and then you have all the other tools which build on top of the
Right.
CRM. And so each one of them decides like which other tools you can integrate with, which other tools you can partner with. And so that's a great way of like mapping out like, okay, we have, a set of customers. They all use roughly the same tools. Which of these tools do we really work with well? Because whether it's intentional or not, your tool is almost always optimized to work well with like another partner
Right.
tool. It's oftentimes not intentional, but it's just kind of like the way you built it for whatever
Sure.
reason, based on customer feedback, tends to work well with another tool. And you just need to uncover who are these people who you work really well with together. And it's not something you come up with; it's always something you uncover. Like it can't be you in a boardroom making that decision who you partner with. It has to be led by the partner, by the customer. It has to be led from like it has to be derived from these interviews you do with customers, or in your case, which I'm like a big fan of, is just actually going there physically and seeing how the different tools work together, which is something we in software just can't do.
Right.
Like it's very hard to see physically like how the different tools interact. You have to like just ask your customers to show you their workflows, but just by looking at how your customers use your product as a context of the greater whole is going to give you tons of partner ideas.
So one of the feedback, one of the kind of common bits of feedback I get from industrial manufacturers when I talk about this concept, let's look at your adjacencies and figure out where there might be a fit. And they say often, well, we don't want to annoy other companies in that adjacent space if we select one of them So how do does it have to be exclusive, or can you work with multiple companies at once?
So generally, as a rule of thumb, exclusivity is something that shouldn't be given out lightly. So I would not recommend you to have an exclusive partnership until there's a really good reason to do
Right.
so. But generally speaking, what we see at Hopin as well is that if you partner with the right partner in the beginning, everybody else will want to partner with you. And so that's actually one of the greatest playbooks for technology partnerships. Maybe we can take a step back just to discuss like what type of partnerships
Sure.
exist. So if you think about like different types of partnerships, like what you just described, where like your tool works well with another tool, is very different from like you partnering, for example, with an industry association. So where is the difference, right? The the definition of like each type of partnerships is derived from the business unit that you support. And so a marketing partnership is a partnership which is aligned with the goals of the marketing team. A technology partnership is aligned with the goals of the product team and so forth. Like a service partnership is aligned with the goal of the implementation team or the customer support team, right? And so each function within the business has different types of partners they could work with. You, as the partnership leader, don't have a specific goal in mind. You don't have like a specific function you own. You're actually more of a strategy that every single part of the business can implement. And so you're more like the quarterback. This is why like normally the CEO is like the chief partner
Okay.
officer, because the CEO is the one who has the big picture in mind and can actually help all the other business units work with partners. But if you're a partnerships leader, like the biggest mistake is you can have your like you set up your own goals and hope that you have your own initiatives, because you're such a small team normally, like you need other
Right.
teams to,
Right.
help you implement these partnerships. And so if we now look at product partnerships, as we just mentioned, um now I lost my train of thought.
Types of partnerships.
Oh, can you repeat your initial question? Sorry.
Um, you got me so interested in your answer. I don't remember exactly what I asked. I think it
Oh,
is
yes.
about.
I got it. I got it.
Go ahead.
It was about being
Right.
competitive and like being
Exclusive.
worried that like you're yeah, exclusive, right? So what we saw at Hopin, which was fascinating to observe, is that if you partner with the market leader in any given industry or any given category, all the competitors will want to partner with you as well. That's something which we've noticed a lot, because initially like a partnership setting it up, etc., is like it's quite expensive, so you need to be selective, and so you probably want to choose the tool which most of your customers already
Hmm.
use, which tends to be the market leader because it's the best, and which has the best product team that you can integrate with, because building an integration is really expensive, and it's really difficult as well because you're working with like another company's
Right.
engineers. And so if they're bad engineers, like you're wasting a lot of time on them and they actually like can't really bring it to completion. Like I've been part of multiple integrations which actually never saw the light of day because it was just such a nightmare. And so by launching a really good integration, a really good partnership with one of these providers, what will happen is that all the industry will take note and say, "Oh my god, like I want something like this as well." And so then they will come to you as well and will try to partner. And now you should set the expectation with that initial partner that, "Hey, you're the first one to partner with us, and so there is an advantage in that, and
Hmm.
we will put extra effort into the integration and make it really good, but you're not going to be the only one because we will just follow wherever our customers want to go." And so
Got it.
exclusivity is oftentimes not in the best interest of the customer, which is why I wouldn't recommend it.
Makes
Um,
sense.
and your initial partner will understand that like the initial value of like being the first one to integrate with and having that additional like 1 or 2 years head start should be good enough to engage in this partnership versus being the only one forever,
Right.
because exclusivity is always going to stifle competition, which is always going to lead to like really nasty results. i
And
have
so
a
go,
I have a
go.
great story about this.
Yeah. I mean, I
Oh,
think I want to hear that story, but I want to reinforce the point. You're saying
yeah,
solve for the customer, and so
yeah,
exclusivity doesn't help the customer. That's the bottom line.
yeah. Another reason why is also, the lack of competition. Like in the US, we love capitalism and we love competition, and I'm a big believer in it because, as an example, Hopin is a virtual events platform. And during the pandemic, a lot of our clients wanted to host multilingual events in Spanish, German, etc., on top of their English events. And so we partnered with an interpretation tool to help us, source these interpreters, but also like build, like integrate the tech to actually have multiple different audio streams in your
Hmm.
event, so you can listen to the event in German, English, Spanish, and so forth. Initially, we only had one of these, and it worked out brilliantly. We had a phenomenal partnership. But then after a while, some customers reached out to us and said, "Hey, they were being charged too much. The service quality is not great. We are unhappy with what this partner is delivering." And what we realized was that by only having one partner in this space, we really like created a monopoly by
Got it.
accident for that partner, which meant that there was no quality control, there was no accountability, and so forth. And so, like in any kind of monopoly situation, there are two ways of solving it. One is to introduce regulation and like try to like create a contract which makes it easier for us to force the partner to deliver, but that's really hard to reinforce. Or we just introduce competition. So by the time we added like a second and third provider on, all of a sudden like prices dropped, quality improved, and it was all sorted. And so, it's very difficult to pull this off with only one partner if it's exclusive, because you develop so much partner concentration risk in that moment.
How does the Nearbound movement fit into partnerships?
Mm. Nearbound is a really interesting one. So you should definitely follow Jared Fuller if you haven't yet on LinkedIn. He's the one who like um, is evangelizing this a lot, and the company Reveal coined the term Nearbound. And Nearbound is really like trying to take partnerships to the next
Okay.
level. So partnerships has been around forever, and like it's gotten hijacked, as I mentioned before, by many people. And like partnerships, is something which sounds like really like a win-win situation. So sales and all kinds of other people are trying to like smooth it like out deals by calling them a partnership. And so Nearbound is like trying to like rebrand the partnerships idea as a go-to-market strategy for each individual department. As I mentioned before, like partnerships is not something which you as a partnerships leader can own, but it's something which is more like an overlay
Right.
strategy for all the different departments within your company. And that is really what Nearbound stands for. It's really like the idea that like, hey, instead of like calling it your partnership strategy for marketing, you call it Nearbound marketing, as a way to like grab the attention and also like speak their language. Because before we had outbound, which is like going directly to the customer and like
Right.
calling them. We had inbound, which is like going through blog posts and like Google searches, etc., and like helping the customer
Mm-hmm.
find you. And now Nearbound is by surrounding the partner, um, surrounding the customer through partners and through trusted relationships.
And you've got another show, or maybe it's part of your partnership, Nearbound Alliances. Is that a separate podcast, or is that just a portion of partnership?
Yeah, it's a blog series I've done with nearbound.com. So nearbound.com has a daily
Right.
newsletter, which they publish, on all topics partnerships, and I'm like a regular contributor there. And for Nearbound Alliances, like Jared and I, like we love nerding out about like these very, very large industry defining partnerships like Microsoft and OpenAI, for example. And so I've been writing blog posts about these kind of large partnerships. For example, the Microsoft and OpenAI one is like one of the most popular blog posts I've written it, where we like break down step by step this kind of partnership, what led to it, what are the implications of it, and also like what could go wrong. And in the Microsoft OpenAI one, like it looked for a moment like it was going very, very
Right.
wrong.
Um, the biggest thing that you knew for sure about partnerships some years ago that now you realize was wrong.
Biggest thing I knew for sure. Great question. Um, one thing which one mistake we've made, and I think a lot of people make in partnerships, is what I call the shiny partner syndrome. And so when a Google, Microsoft, or maybe like in manufacturing, it could be like a large company like Airbus or Boeing or Tesla, knocks on your door and wants to partner with you, oftentimes you will leap on it. Oftentimes your CEO like made that introduction or like met somebody at dinner who works at these companies and is like, oh my god, it's such a great logo, we should definitely partner with them, etc. But partnerships are multi-year projects. Like it oftentimes takes several months or years to set up a partnership, and then it will take another year or two to actually see like the full value of a partnership. And so, in order to like really like continue the momentum, it has to be valuable for everybody involved. And just having a big logo is not valuable in itself. It's just a flash in the pan PR
Right.
announcement, but the market ultimately decides whether your partnership is successful. And if customers don't think it's valuable, that big announcement doesn't matter. Like you're not getting a competitive advantage just by being mentioned in a blog post with
Right.
Tesla. You're getting a competitive advantage by being integrated into every single product Tesla ships, for example. Like that's where you have that sustained advantage, right? And so one of the big mistakes is like going after shiny partners and going after one-off initiatives, like going after that PR
Right.
launch, going after like that big media announcement. Those things don't matter at all. What matters is being part of like a partner's process. Like if you are embedded into, for example, the sales process, it might be a slow ramp. Like they might sell one of your devices every month in the beginning, but as they start to see more and more successes, they will just include you into every single sales conversation
Mm-hmm.
you have. And that's where the flywheel starts spinning, because you see sustained growth versus like that flash in the
Right.
pan with like, oh my God, we're partnering with Tesla now. You know, we kind of like our hands off after that.
Makes sense. In the industrial space, many companies sell through distributors and reps and agents. Is indirect sales channel an example of a partnership, or is that something different?
Yeah, absolutely. It's something which is becoming less important in software because of the direct to consumer movement. So it used to be that when you wanted your software sold, like this is why I dislike the books from the 2000s about partnerships. It used to be that when you wanted your software sold, you had to like create CDs and then like ship them to Radio Shack and like negotiate that you get shelf space in Radio Shack, and then like somebody will come in and buy your software. But that's not how people buy software anymore. So indirect sales has become less important on the software side unless it is something which we call a value added reseller. And so a pure resale is like relatively rare because people realize that the man in the middle like doesn't deserve that much money, or it's probably like an added
Right.
expense. But if it's a value added reseller, like somebody who provides services on top or provides an integrated solution with their product, that's still something which is also very alive and well in the
So
software industry.
Salesforce is a bear to implement in many cases, and so there's a lot of people that generate. I mean, their business is helping companies buy and implement Salesforce. That's a VAR.
Yes. Um, Not necessarily.
Okay.
So Salesforce is like an interesting one because oftentimes they still do the direct sales themselves, and then they help like have something which we call a systems integrator or like an agency who actually like implements for you. And so these are basically service partnerships. And this is a fascinating piece of startup lore, or like just startup, methodology. Is that you as a startup want to IPO with a 10x revenue multiple. That means if you have $100 million revenue, you want to IPO at $1 billion. But if too much of that revenue is derived from services, that revenue multiple will be dropped by the market. Like bankers evaluating you or investors evaluating you will probably drop it to like maybe a 5x or maybe a
Hmm.
3x if they think that all of your revenue comes from services, because services don't scale. You have to hire
Right.
people, you have to like, fire people, you have to like, promote them, like pay sick leave, whatever, versus software scales very well. And so one of the reasons why a lot of companies like Salesforce have A, such high valuations, but then also B, embrace this like service integrator model, a systems integrator model and service partnerships, is because they want to like keep their headcount as low as possible and outsource a lot of these tasks to partners. So when the boom comes, the partner hires
Right.
more people, but when the bust comes, the partner lays off people. But Salesforce looks like they don't have to lay off people. They don't have all the negative PR. They don't have the stock price impact.
So that sounds like a selfish motivation, not necessarily driven by competitive advantage from the buyer's perspective.
It depends. I think again, like the same market forces apply as well, right? Like with system integrators, like one way is like one thing which companies like Salesforce benefit from is the competition between these like different SIs, and so the quality of the service is often very very high because the systems integrator knows that if they like don't do a good job, Salesforce can just
Right.
walk away and like go for somebody else. And so there definitely is like a great competitive advantage in the sense that the system integrator gets leads from
Got it.
Salesforce, so they have like an advantage in competing. But then Salesforce also has an advantage because they can oftentimes sell like a lower deal themselves, and like a lot of the cost is carried by the systems integrator.
Understand. I heard you say something once that I'm having a hard time wrapping my mind around. I'm hoping that you can say it in different words, but I think what I understood you to say was basically the companies don't necessarily have to build a partnership function from scratch. In some cases, they can kind of buy it, and I don't see quite how that works. Help me understand. Or did I misunderstand
So
you before?
yes, I think that was a slight misunderstanding. Like, I don't think you can buy a partnerships function necessarily, but you can like build it or uncover it, right? And so you don't actually like have to like, come up with like what should be our partnership strategy in like a boardroom
Hmm.
again. Like the way to go about it is to like, figure out like who are your customers? Like what products are they already using? Who do they listen to? Like how can I live like my customer to help me understand like what are the other influencing factors that surround my customer? And then as a result of that, you can like analyze each one of these buckets of potential partners that you find, and you can ask yourself like who do we want to partner with, what do we want to build in house, and what do we want to buy. This is like the classic build buy
Got it. I
partner
see what you're saying.
strategy that people might have heard about before. And when you do this built by partner strategy, two things are really important. One is like, is this a core activity? Like, is this a core capability that we need to have in
Hmm.
house? Because one of the biggest mistakes people do when they partner is they outsource something which is crucial to their service. And so, for example, with Salesforce, you noticed like they don't outsource the software development. Like, software is Salesforce's main business. This is something which needs to be done in house. They need to hire those engineers and have full control over it. But, for example, the integration of that software once it's been sold is something which is not really crucial to them. It's like very labor intensive and so forth. And so that's something which they can outsource. Similarly, like the other variable to like keep in mind is like how urgent is this? Because Salesforce can afford to like, spend months developing their software, which is completely fine. But when something big comes around, like for example, AI, right? It's kind of like difficult to build something as large as like your own AI model in house
Hmm.
really fast. And so at that point, like when building is not an option, you have to decide like, is this important to my business? Is this core? Because if it is, you want to buy. You want to like, either buy it from a vendor or you want to buy like a software company which does AI and just like own that entirely. Or if it's not crucial to you, you can partner and you can just kind of like, like outsource all of that to a partner, integrate, and then say, look, we also do AI now. But it's really important to keep that build by partner decision in mind because it changes over time as well. Something which is not urgent might become urgent all of a sudden.
It feels like, though, if you're looking at possible acquisitions and you see a company that has built a successful partnership program and you acquire them, presumably you're going to acquire a culture and best practices that you then ought to be able to roll out through the organization.
Yeah, I mean that's the theory. Generally, they're like
You sounded very
there are
skeptical
three
as you
reasons
said
why.
theory.
Yeah. Oh, yes. We experienced multiple different variations of this working out, but generally, like there are three reasons you want to buy a company. One is like the team, one is the product, and one is
Hmm.
the market. Ideally you buy all three. Like ideally you have like an awesome team, an awesome product, an awesome market, but that's very expensive. Oftentimes it will boil down to like a
Right.
couple of these. Um, the ones which work out the best tend to be either when you're buying the team, so it's like an acqui-hire, like you're just buying like the team for the sake of like basically employing them, which tends to work out well because you can normally they accumulated like a pretty high quality group of
Hmm.
people, which you can then employ in your company and like you can implement that culture, etc. Like that integration seems to be like relatively straightforward in most cases. Or if you acquire the market, like if you acquire like their
Right.
customer base, that oftentimes works well as well because it's validated. There is like a significant overlap hopefully with your customer base, and you feel like you can actually like make more money by like selling to these customers
Sure.
together. The one which goes wrong a lot is the product. Like if you're buying a product in the hope that you can like integrate it, that's where a lot of mistakes are made because it might be built in a different stack, it might be built by in a different
Right.
framework, or it might just not be as interoperable as you thought. And so that's often where partnerships can really help you because you can test the waters with an integration
I see.
first, and then only if you see like, hey, customers like it, it works really well, we work well with this team, do we want to buy the company.
That's an interesting application of partnerships that I hadn't thought of. That's a cool idea.
Yeah, testing
Right.
the water.
You spoke earlier about how there's product partnerships, sales partnerships, marketing partnerships, and there's kind of a small core strategic partnerships element. Often the CEO may own that responsibility. So how do you describe the org chart? Do you have a partnerships person in sales ops and a partnerships person in marketing ops and a partnerships person in product marketing, or are they often shared responsibilities? Are they dotted lines up to the core partnerships? How do you structure that?
Yeah. So again, it really boils down to like, what does your business and what do your customers
Hmm.
care about? Like what type of partnerships are relevant to you? Like where do you need help? What are the things that are not core to your business that you can outsource, right? Maybe it is marketing. Like maybe instead of building your own community, you want to like partner with somebody who has a community. In that case, your partnerships team should sit in your marketing team. If your partnerships team is solely focused on like product integrations and co-selling with other product partners, it should probably sit either in the sales team or it should sit in the product team. And so as a result, there's no one answer, which is something which is really difficult to wrap your
Right.
head around. Because initially when I started, I like asked people like, where should partnerships sit, and like you just get like a whole variety of different answers because everybody talks about a different kind of partnership. And so depending on what kind of partnerships which matter to you, you should choose that team to be like the home of the partnerships team, unless you are in a situation where we do marketing partnerships, we do service partnerships, we do channel partnerships, and we do product partnerships. because in that case, oftentimes the easiest is to either roll up to like the COO or to the
Mhm.
CEO. In my case, like it was the COO, who I reported into, because that was also where our corporate development team was. That was where a lot of the shared functions in the
Right.
business were, and so that made the most sense for us in that moment.
So I came to this conversation with a very kind of naive and limited understanding, and you're gradually opening my eyes. I'm thinking this question may reflect that naivete, but it still feels to me like sales enablement content ends up being the glue that helps hold it all together, because people, you have to have a way to share the message. You have to have a way to provide that message to buyers and to the market across sales teams within companies. Am I on the right track? Is sales enablement content a critical element of making this whole thing work?
Enablement content in general
Okay.
is that's 100% true, because like there's always a better together story you're telling with your
Right.
partners, and so then the question is like, what is the better together story? Like you pitched me on like your machine and my machine work well together, but how? Like now show me what you actually mean with that, right? And so definitely, you like the hardest challenge is like that you're working with another company's team, and so you have to enable the other side as well. And one of the things like I've seen a lot of partnerships people do is they create specific documentation for the other team. So they like create like specific enablement material for the sales team of the partner, or for the services team of the partner, or the engineers of the partner, and so forth. And so then you have like this real big mess where you have like enablement documentation for your customers, you have enablement documentation for yourself, and you have enablement documentation for your partner. And so there are three different sources of truth, and you need to keep all of them updated, and it becomes like a huge jumble of like different like conflicting information
So
and
what's
so
the
forth.
right answer?
And so yeah, the solution I found, which is not always possible, but the best thing you can do is try to keep just one source of information for everybody. Like ideally the same documentation your customers use is so good that your internal teams will use them and your
Hmm.
partners as well. And if it's not possible because you don't want to share all everything with the customer, maybe try to at least like break it down to just like one external, one internal, and that's it. And so your partners use either the customer documentation or your documentation as well, but not like specific, just partner specific enablement
Got it.
material. Like you should try to streamline as much as possible.
Thinking back over your career, and you've got many years ahead of you, obviously, although maybe you've got tech early retirement plans. But through your career thus far, what do you think is the biggest mistake, or what's the thing that you thought at the time was the biggest mistake you'd made that now turns out in retrospect to have been a brilliant decision?
Great question. I think for me, like one of the things I've done in the past was always go maximum risk. Like I, moved abroad because I didn't want to like, be stale and stay at home. I didn't know anybody there, so that was like in a way risky. I didn't know how it would turn out. It would turn out brilliantly. I wanted to found my own startup without like really knowing what to do, and like I got lucky and like I found this like talent investor. With my startup, we like took the biggest, most ambitious idea we could, which was again maximum risk. And frankly, like not all of them worked out. Like my startup, for example, didn't work out, but by pushing yourself and like actually like accepting more risk and like having a larger risk appetite, a lot of people will respect you more. That's something which I learned. So a lot of people love ambition, and then even if it doesn't work out, oftentimes you're like like I like to call it fail upwards. Like it's not like you're in the same spot, but all of a sudden like you still ended up like making significant money, or you still ended
Sure.
up like uh, gaining relationships that you would have not had otherwise, and so forth. And so it's not as binary as like you either win or not. Like oftentimes even if it doesn't end up succeeding, there's a lot which is gained from like attempting something new and like trying to like push yourself to take on more
I'm
risk.
guessing your daughter will change your risk profile a little bit going forward.
Slightly, but then like it was easiest when you had like zero money and like no
Right.
family, but then at the same time, like now that we have more money, actually we should be more willing to take on risk, right? So I'm trying to balance that constantly myself. It's a
Well, and when your
spectrum.
crypto goes to the moon, then you'll be investing in startups.
Hopefully,
All right.
hopefully.
So obviously, people need to buy your book. Keep their eyes peeled for when that's published. They need to tune into partnership, get on the list, um, register for that, so they get the notifications that it's going on. But where do you turn for info? What other
Yeah,
podcasts, or YouTube channels, or blogs? What do you recommend?
yeah, definitely. The first one is like our friends at nearbound.com. it's a great daily source of partnerships insights. Jared Fuller specifically, like who is chief ecosystem officer at Reveal, shares a lot of really great information. Um, Books which I really liked are Nearbound and the Rise of the Hoover Economy, which is like Jared's book. That was something which was really interesting to me. And then another one which is lesser known. It's also older, but I feel like it's also very relevant to manufacturing as well because it talks a lot about OEM deals. Is a book called The Zumo Advantage by Bernie Brenner, the founder of TrueCar.com. Because he broke this down like 15, 16 years ago
Wow.
already. And a lot of the playbook he laid out back then is still relevant today, and so it's something which I thoroughly enjoy. And then, of course, another great resource is just going on to LinkedIn and continuing the conversation. Like start posting about your partnerships questions. Use the hashtag partnership. Always feel free to tag me or other people who are talking about partnerships, and then just enjoy the conversation in the comments.
So along those lines, what's the best way for people to connect with you? On LinkedIn, other places? Where?
Yes, LinkedIn is the place where I put all my eggs in one basket and just said this is the one I want to
So you're
focus
not
on. So always feel free to reach out with me. I do weekly office hours on
you're
LinkedIn as
not
well.
Gary V, where you're on every different platform.
No, you just got to go where your audience is, and I learned that partnerships people hang out on LinkedIn, but they're not
Got
on
it.
Twitter, and they're definitely not on
All
TikTok.
right, you want to take a minute and make a quick pitch for StreamYard? Explain to people what it does and why it might be a tool they should be looking at.
Yeah. So StreamYard is the number one studio for non-gaming live streams and podcast recordings. So as I mentioned before, like we're a live streaming platform, which makes it incredibly easy to go live. So you can easily go live on YouTube, Facebook, LinkedIn, Twitter, and all the other big social media platforms. And you can also record video podcasts if you want. So if you record a video podcast, we actually record on everybody's device locally. So you get like a really crisp recording which always looks perfect and sounds great, regardless of like what your guest's internet connection, for
Got it.
example, is. And it's trusted by like over 10 million creators globally. So I hope to see you on StreamYard
Yeah,
soon.
and in a pitch for partnerships, I guess been trying to figure out how to start doing LinkedIn Live events with a couple different people, and so I went to LinkedIn's help document, how to start with LinkedIn Live, and it says if you want software to help with it, here's our partners, and StreamYard's right there at the top of the list. So guess where I'm going to sign up.
Yes, appreciate it. And yeah, that's a great example of some of the work we've done with LinkedIn.
All right, look into your crystal ball if you would. Biggest risk for businesses over the next 5 years?
I think the biggest risk is going to be like how to stay top of mind for your customers. And we have no idea what's going to come right now. I hate to talk about AI a lot because I feel like it's overhyped, but it is so true. Like if you looked at the new announcement of, for example, OpenAI with ChatGPT 4.0, um, it is almost lifelike. And so, like an outbound sales call might be an AI, but you don't know that it is not a real
Right.
person. Or all the blog posts you'll see will become like incredibly good quality content, but they're all AI generated. And so if everybody has great content, if the cost of content, if the cost of calls goes down to zero, like where are your customers going to find
Right.
out about you? How are they going to learn about your tools and solutions? And the solution I'm banking on, and I think a lot of people in partnerships believe is the right one, is that it will all boil down to like who they trust right now, who already solves their problems.
And so that probably then answers my next question, which was going to be, as you look out over the next 5 years, what's the biggest opportunity for companies? It sounds like that's probably your answer.
Partnerships.
Surprising answer. All right.
Yeah.
So here's one last time as you take us home. Give us kind of 2 minutes, 3 minutes, whatever you need to really encapsulate the essence and the urgency of partnerships, not just for tech companies, but to the extent that you can extrapolate for industrials as well.
Yeah. I think that we're probably in one of the most exciting times right now that anybody has ever lived in, just because of all the change that is happening in the world around new technologies, geopolitical change, and so forth. With that comes a lot of volatility, and with volatility, I believe it will be harder to do business. But the companies which are really good at this and are also willing to embrace new technologies and ways of going to market and ways of reaching their customers and building trust are going to ultimately succeed. And so partnerships is a great way of doing this because you're leveraging the existing trust companies have with their audience, and also leverage customer bases where basically you already captured an audience which is relevant to your product from the partner. And so it is probably one of the greatest go-to-market opportunities right now, and also ways to like outsource a lot of the manufacturing you might do in-house to a partner so you can really focus on what you're good at. Because in a time where like it becomes super easy to get basic at a skill, it will become even more important to be like highly proficient at one
Right.
specific task. And so partners can help you like double down on what you're really good at and outsource everything that you might not want to do in-house or you don't have the capacity for.
Strong finish. Thank you. Thanks so
Appreciate
much
it.
for your time, for your insights. I guess as we wrap up, I ought to give you or wish you ferti, if I'm saying that correctly. So thanks for
Yeah.
joining me. That's the bottom line.
Yeah. Always a pleasure, and auf Wiedersehen.
Cheers. So everyone, please make sure these are great insights. Like it, comment, review it, and share this with other people in your company or in your trade association or acquaintances that you have, peers, whatever the case may be, people that need to hear it. Thanks so much for joining us today.